3 in the morning, a sharp, insistent knock jolted me awake. I woke up instantly, my heart pounding. I immediately thought of Lisa. Our relationship was like a roller coaster. We'd broken up countless times with shouts of "never again," only to reconcile with promises that the fights were over. Jealousy and passion overwhelmed us during the day. But at night, silence fell. Lisa had recently left, taking her things and leaving an empty apartment behind. Hearing the knock, I assumed she'd spent the whole night restless, realized how much she loved me, and returned. I was ready to forgive everything, already reaching for the lock, turning the key halfway, but the knock suddenly became strange, sharp, not hers. It wasn't Lisa. I let go of the key and shouted, "Who's there?" The only response was heavy, labored breathing, as if someone were choking in agony. I repeated the question. Silence, just hoarse, agonizing gasps. Is someone hurt? Can't they speak? I thought, but there was no voice. Peering through the peephole, I saw only darkness. Someone had covered it to keep me from seeing who was outside. It was deliberate, meant to scare, but I wasn't easily frightened. Anger and adrenaline surged through me. My fists clenched. "Open it and deal with them," flashed through my mind, but I held back. "You have 1 minute to leave, or I'll throw you out," I roared. Shuffling steps and the fading, raspy breathing told me the unwanted visitor was leaving. I was desperate to sleep. I'd worn myself out with arguments during the day, and I lay down, forgetting it until morning. In the morning, as I stepped out, I noticed the peephole was clogged with a lump of wet clay. I should have gone out and taught them a lesson, I thought, scrubbing the door. The building was old, home to a motley crew of residents. Some, after decades of alcohol and drug abuse, had become emaciated, nearly mindless shadows wandering the courtyard. They'd never bothered me before, but now this. I vowed that next time they'd regret it. The next night, someone scratched at the door again, but this time it wasn't just tapping. It was as if claws were trying to rip out the lock. The peephole was clogged again. I was furious, but tried not to lose my cool. Who knew what was behind it? Fear began creeping in, though I bit my lip, trying to stay calm. "Who's there?" I yelled, banging on the door to clear the peephole. Light returned, but the glass remained murky, and I couldn't make out the face outside. The figure was thin, short, unsteady, unable to hold their head straight. I grabbed a metal coat hanger. I didn't want to touch such deranged people with my hands in case they infected me. "Get out!" I bellowed, flinging the door open. But what I saw couldn't be alive. Before me stood a desiccated, eyeless, naked person with skin like polished bronze. Dark brown, glossy, hairless, a seamless scar, as if they'd been burned with acid but survived, only to become a living embodiment of pain. They breathed through an open mouth, feeling the walls, trying to grasp at the air, twitching their ears and wrinkling their nose to compensate for their blindness. One look, and you'd never pity yourself again. I slammed the door shut to avoid seeing their suffering, but I realized they didn't want to be seen, which is why they'd covered the peephole. They terrified like a nightmare, but seemed weak, harmless. The next day, I decided to talk to my neighbor, Vadim. We were friendly, though not particularly close. Inviting him for coffee, I told him about the nighttime knocks and what I'd seen. Vadim didn't let me finish, cutting in. I nearly pissed myself when I saw one of those dry-faced things. They scratched at your door too, huh? They roam here at night like rats. What dry-faced thing? I asked. 2 nights ago, I opened my door, and one of them tried to climb inside. I can't even call it a face. It's a mockery. They've multiplied like rats around here. Didn't you hear? The whole building talked about it yesterday. So, did you report it to anyone? I asked. No one. We agreed to keep quiet. You don't tell anyone either, he said seriously. Why keep quiet? Blind, undead freaks are wandering the building, I exclaimed. You weren't here 4 years ago. Don't know how we fought for this place. If it weren't for your great-grandmother, we'd be living in those flimsy panel buildings across the river. This is our problem, and we'll solve it ourselves. Just keep your doors locked at night. We'll handle them, he promised. I agreed to trust the neighbors and try to forget, though I couldn't imagine how they'd handle these creatures. They were terrifying but seemed weak and not malicious. What was there to fear? That's what I thought, until they showed their strength. The knocks and scratches resumed late at night. I woke up, irritated, pulling the blanket over my ears, but after a few minutes I couldn't ignore it. Judging by the sounds, they weren't just scratching my door, they were tearing it apart like a tin can, ripping chunks off. I hoped the long hallway amplified the noise, but fear still gripped me. Lisa had left just in time, missing this. The blind one breathed heavily, clawing at the door, and it seemed like one more push would break through. It lasted an hour before finally stopping. I knew they'd left, but I was too scared to open the door until morning. Seeing the shredded door frame in the daylight, deep grooves, jagged marks, bite marks on the steel plates, I realized my flimsy Chinese door had barely held. It was nearly punctured, with just one layer left. Vadim's door was sturdier, but they'd torn off the handle. In one apartment, the blind ones broke through, splintering an old wooden door to pieces. A family with a child escaped through the window. The trio of eyeless creatures stumbled through the rooms, groping everything, overturning furniture, then found a wardrobe and stole some clothes. But that wasn't the worst night. In our building lived an old man, Yuri Viktorovich, tough and covered in blue tattoos on his arms. They broke his door too, but he kept quiet until he called us, Vadim and me, to confess. "Stay out of my business," he'd shouted at first, but then relented. One of those bastards climbed into my place at night. I grabbed a chair and started beating it. The chair broke, and it fell, stopped breathing, lay there dead. I didn't know what to do. It didn't seem human, but who knows what had happened if I were caught. I dragged it to a room, thinking what to do, and it lay there, gasped loudly, twitched, its joints cracked, then stood up and left. Immortal, or what? I knew someone who might help. I had a friend, Ekaterina Guskova, a history student studying genealogy and archives. I messaged her, not revealing everything, just asking if she knew anything about our building. She replied immediately, "I was interested in this house before, but there's almost nothing on it. Strange story. It used to be a workers' barracks, later converted into a residential building. No one knows what went on there. Documents were classified and didn't survive." She sensed I wasn't asking casually, so I had to tell her about the collapsed earth and the strange occurrences. Within an hour, Ekaterina arrived, looked at the pit and said, "It's a mass grave." I didn't understand how she knew, but to me it was just a deep hole. She descended on a rope, returned with a piece of rusty chain. "The dead aren't chained," she noted. My imagination filled the gaps. The barracks, unethical science, the pursuit of immortality, victims, blindness, burning, live burials. I shuddered at my own thoughts, but the truth was beyond us. Night was approaching, and many doors were already broken. We had to act. Yuri Viktorovich's experience showed we could temporarily incapacitate them. Neighbors armed themselves with anything heavy. Vadim grabbed an axe. I took a metal pipe. They were full of rage and excitement, but I felt uneasy. One blind one had already nearly punctured my door, and I didn't want to fight creatures capable of that. I decided to stay in reserve, helping if needed. Darkness fell. Neighbors patrolled the hallway and street. Tension hung in the air. I sat in my apartment, locking the door, though the last layer could be pierced with a finger. Noise, shouts, chaos erupted. My adrenaline surges vanished, but duty to my neighbors forced me out. At the end of the hallway, loose boards revealed several blind ones crawling from under the floor. Naked, some wearing stolen clothes, all dry, burned, noseless, earless. There were 8 of them, crowding the hallway. Neighbors attacked, and the blind ones fell before they could straighten up. I couldn't help in time. They were knocked out and piled like logs. Under the boards was an old well, once part of the water system, their daytime hideout. We decided, tie them up and throw them back into the well, covering it with sand, cement, and gravel. I hauled buckets of sand all night while we concreted the well. I felt sick. I'd been dragged into this madness, unsure what these beings were. Were they human? No. They seemed pitiful, cold, maybe seeking clothes for warmth, and we buried them under concrete. Lisa wanted to reconcile, but I told her it was better not to return. I had no strength left for passionate relationships. I slept poorly, haunted by nightmares. One night I heard scraping, not at the door, but from below. Quiet, rustling under the floor. It went on night after night. Neighbors greeted me but stayed silent, and I didn't know if they heard it too. The sounds grew louder, first like mice gnawing, then like cracking stones. I almost got used to it, thinking it'd be like this forever. But I ignored my gut and Ekaterina's advice to leave. I had enough problems, and my nerves were shot. Moving wasn't an option. That was my last night in that house. I lay there, trapped in a heavy sleep, alone with my illness, when scraping and teeth gnashing started below. I imagined hoarse breathing, my hand dangling off the bed, and felt cold air blow through the floorboards. The boards cracked, and a creature emerged. It roared, flailed its arms, its nails slashing my leg, tearing the skin. I wrapped myself in a blanket and fled through the window. The blind one was only halfway out, or it wouldn't have let me go, and I wouldn't have survived. That night, it happened to others too. The buried ones gnawed through the concrete, emerged under the floor, and, even blind, found the apartments they'd targeted before. They broke into Vadim's, Yuri Viktorovich's, and others. No one could defend themselves. The blind ones grew fiercer, showing animal strength, tearing my neighbors apart. I was taken to the morgue for identification. The old man had no face. His body gnawed to the bones. I recognized him by his blue tattoos. Vadim's remains were just a head, neck, part of a shoulder, and an arm. From others, only fragments remained. I never returned to that building. It's now a restricted area. Survivors relocated to cheap panel buildings. They say the dry-faced still live in our apartments, taking our places. Why did the blind ones crave those apartments? Maybe they once belonged to them? I don't know and don't want to. I just want to forget. But I can't yet.